Hello, everyone. It is such a delight to welcome Ehsan Khoshbakht, the director of Filmfarsi, the beautiful film that you just got a chance to watch. My name is Samhita Sunya. I'm a professor of cinema in the Department of Middle Eastern and South Asian Languages and Cultures. And in our discussion today, I hope to say a little bit more about why this film was so special and it was such a wonderful thing to bring to our film festival today, and to hear more from Ehsan about the fascinating journey of how he put this film together and how it came to be. Ehsan is an independent scholar, curator, filmmaker, man of many trades that I hope to learn more about as well. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Samita, and thanks to the audience for watching the film.
So I've, long followed your writings on jazz music and cinema through a blog. I've known your curatorial work, and I think a long time ago we were in touch about the possibility as you were bringing packages of sort of pre-revolutionary Iranian films to other festivals to ask if they would ever come to the US. And this seems like the closest we've gotten with this film. One of the most amazing things about Film Farsi is just the archival gathering itself. The sheer volume of clips that you've edited together in this essay film is phenomenal. And in the absence of necessarily being able to teach a lot of these films with subtitles, I think it's a treasure for scholars, for students to use in the classroom, to inform ourselves. And I'm curious to know more about this process itself of the archival gathering. How did you go about finding all of these clips in the journey of putting Film Farsi together?
You're totally right that it actually came out uh, as a part of my activities as a film curator. So the idea, or let's say the ideal situation for me, was to show a selection of Iranian pre-revolutionary films to an international audience. Since I found the possibilities of achieving that very slim, nearly impossible, I thought this is the closest thing I can do. Use whatever I have, VHS tapes, whatever elements I have, and turn it into a film. So tell the story of those films, which I actually originally wanted to show in their entirety as a documentary film, as an introduction to Iranian pre-revolutionary cinema, or let's say a very specific type of Iranian pre-revolutionary cinema, because I think for um, our audience, it is absolutely essential to realize that we are dealing with a series of films which are popular films, mainstream films, and genre films. And we have the other Iranian cinema, which is far more famous in the West, which is the Iranian art house films. So I started putting together elements. I have been collecting these films on tapes, any format that I could for a long, long time. And because it took such a long time to make this film for various reasons, because first of all, this was mostly a kind of weekend project for me. So I could go do other things, and during the weekends, get together with my two editors and working on the film during a period of 4 or 5 years. And as I was working on this film, many new elements, many new sources uh, uh, were introduced to me, which I could use in my film, like better quality material. Even there are, it's true that at the beginning of the film, I say they are coming from VHS tapes, but in reality, actually, 2 or 3 of the clips used in the film were not from VHS tapes. They were used from 35 mil, which we could add at the very last stage of editing the film. So these are coming from many different sources, and I should say that this film was an extension of my activities as a film programmer and curator.
Well, if you'd like to give the audience a sneak preview of that work, I'd love to hear more. Just, you know, a curatorial package that has been particularly memorable that you'd like to talk about, just to give our audience a sense of this other hat that has been really important for making this film.
Right. Um, Actually, I must say I managed to put together something very small 3 years ago. So, well, naturally, my ideal package is a collection of films which would contain the best of each genre in Iranian pre-revolutionary cinema. So one good musical, one good gangster film or crime thriller, a good melodrama, one good comedy. So a package which would include all the different genres and also some key directors and stars. My absolute favorite director of Iranian pre-revolutionary cinema is Samuel Khachikian. Samuel Khachikian was an Iranian Armenian, so the name sounds Armenian because his parents were migrants, but he was born in Iran, and he became known as the Iranian Hitchcock in the 50s. He was making these wonderful, high stylized film noirs and crime dramas. He tried all different types of genres later on in his career, but basically he was known for his very gorgeously shot black and white crime stories. And I wanted to do something about him. And when we were editing Filmfarsi, after almost a year of negotiations with the Iranian National Film Archive, they allowed us to have access to and screen four of his films, which were four of his best films. So this was a screen in Bologna at the film festival called Il Cinema Ritrovato. Now I'm the co-director of the festival, but back then I was collaborating only as a curator. So this was a major revelation to many people who saw these films in Bologna. They were, first of all, they were totally surprised to see that they are seeing an image of Iran that they have not seen before. It looks very, very westernized. It looks very cool. It has, people are listening to, this is the 50s, right? People are listening to jazz and rock and roll, and have very fashionable ladies walking on the street, and so on and so forth. So this was visually, in terms of what they could see of Iran, that was a revelation. But also in terms of the style of the films and the content of the films, it was very rewarding for them. And I have a small story about that. Yeah, a month later, after these films, these four titles were shown in Bologna, I got a phone call from Nicolas Winding Refn, the great Danish American director, and who had seen the films, and he told me, "I wish I had made those films." I'm quoting him. "I wish I had made those films. Uh, is there anything we could do about that? Is there any way we could restore them? I will pay for the restoration of the films if you could do anything about it." So, someone who's known as one of the finest directors of our time, and is known for uh, starting with something which looks like genre film and kind of transcending uh, the conventions and aesthetics of genre cinema, was equally interested in those films. So this was just one example of the potentials that these films have. And of course, in Filmfarsi, there is a very small section dedicated to Samuel Khachikian and his films.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I actually recall, I think that the first time I had emailed you was when in one of the packages you were curating, you had included Night of the Hunchback.
Yes,
Um,
that was earlier. You're right. Yes, that's more art house cinema. But
yeah,
I tried to show you the. So yeah, it came out here. in 2017, and what you saw was earlier 2015 a selection of Iranian art house films. So this is, I guess, the main challenge I have, because uh, the audiences they have preconceptions about national cinema. So when you say Iranian cinema, they want to see just the great stuff, the art house films. They want to see Kiarostami, they want to see Jafar Panahi. But my argument was that there is uh, greatness in other types of films that the people of those countries, as their own national cinema and popular cinema, have liked and enjoyed over the years. So this was the this was the program uh, which I was talking about. But this is the challenge. So when you go to a cinematheque, let's say in Western Europe, and you say, "Oh, I want to, program a selection of Iranian crime thrillers," that's not very easy. They're not very comfortable with that idea. It's very easy to do Kiarostami, but going beyond that, or a few other names, I think people are a bit afraid of taking the risk of exploring this uh, uh, unexplored territories of film history. But when you show the films, it's so great and it's so enjoyable and it's so rewarding that they see that, wow, there are lots of things to discover about Iranian cinema or any other national cinema in that region.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that that's so key that, the films that we have access to, especially as teachers, we can't let those stand in for the only history of cinema in Iran. So the thing I wanted to share with you was, in the absence of, at that time, 3 years ago or whenever it was, being able to screen Night of the Hunchback, another, as Ehsan just said, a pre-revolutionary film that is more of a sort of new wave from an earlier moment. What I ended up doing is finding this pirated copy on YouTube, and my wonderful colleague in our department, Mahshad Mohit, who is a lecturer of Persian, she came to the class and delivered live voice translations of the film. And it was an amazing experience for students to also realize that so much of the curriculum is shaped by questions of access. What is subtitled? And Masha did a fantastic job. So it was almost even more enjoyable because of those circumstances. So that's just to say, in the same way that you were talking about how this film came about through limitations in terms of your inability to offer the curatorial package that you wanted. Something amazing came out of that in terms of this beautiful film that you made, as you say, on your weekend time, which makes me feel like, what am I doing on my weekends a little bit. Um, but other questions I have for you, and feel free to take up any of these, was just to hear more about how you got into this in the first place, in terms of being a curator, coming into an interest in film Farsi specifically, because in the film you mentioned things about how, like your grandmother had no interest in watching films, and that, so in that sense it wasn't necessarily a family occupation by any means. And then to hear more about the journey of the film in terms of both challenges as you were making it, as well as the journey of the film so far, now that it's been out for, I guess, a little more than a year or so.
That's true. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. First about my grandmother, because I remember her quite often. But the interesting thing about her being so religious was that she was the old school type of religious person, meaning that I believe in what I believe in. You can do your own thing. They are not going to put us in the same grave, as they used to say. So I'm kind of a liberal person essentially. Okay, this is me. You can do whatever you like. So I had the freedom to, in terms of background, of at least family background, to explore whatever I wanted to explore. Of course, they were worried about me all the time because we were doing something which was not legal. It was illegal outright. It was very clear that it was illegal. So they were always this concern over my activities as a cinephile. But that's my story, and or at least my relationship with Farsi has been a very very ambiguous one. As a kid, I was fascinated by it because I was looking at these films. I was seeing Iran, which was both familiar and unfamiliar. It was familiar because they were the same streets, same language, same attitudes, but certain things had changed. For instance, the way that women appeared in public spaces. So it was very interesting. And my brother used to, who's 5 years older, used to bring his films home on tapes. And I had a wonderful time watching this film over and over again with my siblings. And then as cinema gradually became more serious for me, I became a snob, meaning that, okay, now I'm only interested in Robert Bresson and Howard Hawks and John Ford. Oh, film Farsi is awful. So I just kind of distanced myself for a long, long time from film Farsi, which was, obvious, I guess, a very familiar way of a teenager reacting to a cultural phenomenon, which he finds lowbrow culture or not culture at all. So it was, typical reaction to film Farsi on my end. And then something very important happened. So I got, I got into film curating, writing about film and everything. So my return to film Farsi was a curious one because I left Iran a few years ago and I moved to Europe. I moved to London. And then I started missing the old country. And I was trying to reconstruct the memories I had from Iran. And there was no way to do it because there's no strong archiving collection, audiovisual material. Here in the UK, let's say in London, you have a relatively good uh, collection of photographs and recordings and film footage about every neighborhood. But it didn't exist about where I come from. So I realized that actually film Farsi is one of the very few uh, sources I have for making that image, reconstructing that image. So suddenly film Farsi became a documentation of a lost past, my own past, but also distant past, which I haven't lived, but I have seen. I have a visual or cinematic memory of it without actually having a lived memory. Uh, and then they became precious, and I started using them in different ways. And film Farsi was, in fact, for me, an act of remembrance. I remember those films. I remember the figures and people who made them. I also remember or try to remember my own past. And it was a very special experience because it helped me to see and know myself better. Because when you look at film Farsi, of course, you know, you see lots of terrible, terrible things. I mean, you see these, macho characters. It's a very sexist, but the truth is there is a bit of all of us as Iranians, male or female, in those films, in both the positive side of our lives and the negative sides of our lives. They're both in those films, and it was just that kind of observation was very crucial in kind of finding myself at this stage of my life.
Yeah, that makes sense. And do you want to say anything else about either the challenges in the process of finding the films or in terms of the journey of the film so far since it's come out?
Yes. Well, in a sense, I tried to uh, look at this project as something which is going to be done with whatever elements possible. So I didn't make it hard for myself. I said, okay, let me start with what I have and gradually expand it. So I didn't. draw up a list of all the films I wanted and say, okay, now I have to go and look for everything. No, I said, I have this. Let me start with this, and then it became something much bigger. But I had the idea. I said, okay, I need an editor. The film should be edited by someone else. The reason for it was that I needed a critical dialogue with someone. I wanted the film to be constructed as a dialogue, not as a monologue. Of course, now you watch the film, you just hear the monologue because I am the one who's uh, doing the voiceover. But basically, it was a dialogue, and it was a dialogue with uh, my editor, a lady, an Iranian woman, and I also wanted to work with a woman because the gaze in these films is so troubling. Like, the way the camera treats women and gazes at women, it's so troubling that I wanted to work with a female editor. And we had a deal from very first day. I said, look, every time you felt that I am using this footage because I'm enjoying what is shown in it, which is, usually something not very pleasant about women, like, very sexualized image of women. Just cut it out. And she was very essential to the project in that sense. And then after 2 years, uh, I started working with another editor. So she delivered the project, and then she became a mother. So I started working with another editor, which again helped me in a different way because now fresh eyes after 2 years, someone else is, you know, uh, adding his input and kind of shaping up the film. So this is how we work on the film, and this long process also shows itself in the editing of the film that you feel, which is fully deliberate on our end to show that even our feelings towards film fantasy changes as we reach the end of the film. So from kind of not so positive, slightly sarcastic remarks at the beginning, it goes towards sympathy, empathy, understanding, passion, and pain. So this was part of the idea that we realized we could use for the film because this is what we experienced as we were dealing with these films. And since it was premiered last July in the UK, it has been shown in many different film festivals, which is really surprising, and I'm very happy about it. North America, it was an American Film Institute, Rotterdam, Torino, many different wonderful festivals. But let me tell you about my favorite places. So my favorite places for showing this.
Virginia Film Festival.
Let me say countries. It's yes, one of them is the US. So four countries are essential to this story because of the strong uh, uh, relationship between Iranian cinema and those cinemas. So Indian cinema, Egyptian cinema, Turkish cinema, and American cinema. So there were like four major countries for me. And I wanted to show the film in these countries. In Cairo, the film was very well received. Of course, this is something that Egyptians understand. In Turkey, it was wonderful. I had one of the best screenings of the film in Turkey, again, because this is something very close to their culture. Uh, and I haven't managed to screen the film in India yet, but in America, again, in a different way. It's something very different, but it's for Americans. I guess it's must be something very fascinating to see a cinema so obsessed with American cinema and, in a sense, so good in translating those very specific traits of American cinema, a very American way of telling stories in Hollywood films, into something essentially Iranian and respecting the source material, but at the same time trying to convert it into something which has a meaning for the local audience. So these are my four favorite audiences.
That makes a lot of sense. And, to think about what you're presenting in Film Farsi as also a sort of archive of film culture where it very clearly shows this prolific circulation and crisscrossing of, exactly as you said, Hollywood films, Iranian films, Indian films, Turkish films, Egyptian films, and how much they sort of fed off of each other. And not to say that the circulation was even by any means, but even then, like in a place like Iran, you have an audience that knows American films, Indian films, Iranian films, Egyptian films in really interesting ways, where that kind of creative remaking or sort of cross pollination becomes fascinating as show footage of these films in Film Farsi.
Uh, I guess you're right. Yes, and uh, it's one of the very uh, unique characteristics of Iranian film culture that it was exposed to all different kinds of cinemas. So I think it's so unique that perhaps you cannot find any other country like that in the world at that time, because it was very rare. Of course, American films were everywhere, Indian films were many Asian countries, but it was so rare to have American films,
Yeah.
all the latest Italian films, all the latest Soviet films. You know, the northern neighbor Soviet Union, they are interested in uh, exporting their films to Iran. The English are competing for that market too, American. So because of the politics, and the country is so interesting for these world powers, they try to use cinema for kind of conquering the Iranian audiences. And you can see everything from the latest Japanese film to Soviet film to Hollywood film in Iran in the 50s and 60s. And this allowed them to, Iranians to kind of absorb many different things. And then eventually they had to make their own thing, something known as Iranian cinema. And they couldn't stick to the Soviet or to the Indian or to the Egyptian. So what they created was actually a kind of a very fascinating combination of all these different elements. And they created one of the craziest and liveliest of cinematic mishmash uh, anywhere in that region. And that makes Iranian cinema, I think, even more unique when compared to the popular cinemas in countries like Egypt or Turkey.
And I think one of the beautiful complexities that emerges through Film Farsi is, on the one hand, the way in which, as you sort of point out, it was not only a popular cinema, but a populist cinema, where a lot of the audiences for this were assumed often to be sort of working class or poorer audiences, where the irony is that this was also probably the populist audience that supported the revolution and then became its casualty. And related to that is also the way in which I think, in really productive ways, it destabilizes easy notions of even, politics of say, women's attire that often becomes this really loaded symbol of oppression, to where, if this was the cinema that supported the revolution and in some ways was very bold, like where you see very sexy women throughout the film, it's sort of an irony also that um, it's, so I guess it destabilizes these easy assumptions that automatically, if a woman is covered up in a particular way, she's oppressed, or that's sort of an Islamist imposition, because in a way, these films are sort of the popular movement that supported that revolution or part of that. So I'm not sure if I'm articulating this um, exactly in a very clear way, but just to say that as a teaching tool, I think that I really appreciate that it gets at that complexity.
Thank you. And I think you're right that the complexity, I mean, I'm not talking about the complexity of my film, but rather the complexity of the situation and its many contradictions. You
Yeah.
know, you mentioned women. This is just one example, and I think it's perhaps my favorite example when it comes to the contradictions of Iranian society in the 70s and the Iranian Revolution. That is why I started with the shot of that veiled woman uh, during the Cinema Rex trials, that she has witnessed this fire in the cinema. Everyone else has died. 400 people uh, have died, uh, burning alive in the cinema in front of her eyes. And she is the witness. She is the victim. She is the casualty, right? She is the casualty of the Iranian Revolution. She's also a witness. But she was there to watch an Iranian popular film, right? And then that's why I returned to her. And one of the, not the last shot, but one of the last shots of the film is an image of a woman, again veiled, with headscarf, holding a Super 8 camera in her hand. That shot for me was very important because again, you have another contradiction there. Okay, the revolution has happened. Now look at this woman. She is holding a camera in her hands. So instead of being in front of the camera, now she's behind the camera. Where in fact, in reality, she is in front of another camera because someone is filming her. But apparently, she's a filmmaker. But then this liberated post-revolutionary female figure is also another casualty and another victim of the circumstances, because the very same woman, judging from the history of Iran in the past 40 years, couldn't do what they wanted to achieve. So it became, again, we're talking about another form of dictatorship. We are talking about another way of distorted images and telling the story of people through images. So things reversed, but this reversal was not for better. It was not necessarily always for worse, but it was like, because these contradictions were not resolved. Every time we changed for something better, we found ourselves in a situation which was not not any more pleasant than the previous one. So I guess this is a story of contradictions of Iranian society, and the idea of dual identity of Iranians is there. So revolution is the point of reference, but in fact, I think we carry that in us as Iranians, and it stays with us, and it's not going to leave us anytime soon. And I was mostly interested in that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in sort of this gesture towards, thinking about the present, is there anything you'd like to share in terms of what you've been up to lately? I know that probably a lot of plans may have changed with the onset of the pandemic, but what have you been up to since, this film has come out? And are you thinking about any other projects that you might be able to sneak preview?
Um, I've been working on many different things, but during now, the whole week has become a weekend for me because I'm mostly home in my in my study, working. But there is a very exciting project which I would love to share with you. Uh, because it deals with the archive, Iranian cinema, banned films. So there was a film. It was a very important film which I could I used to read about all the time when I was living in Iran. It was called Chess of the Wind, and this film, which was a key film of the Iranian new wave cinema or art house cinema of the 70s, a film which was lost. Uh, the film was found a few years ago, and I managed to get the film, the original camera negative of the film, get it to Bologna in Italy, have it restored. It was the project was initiated by Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Foundation. So all the credit goes to him and to George Lucas for providing the funding for the film. We restored the film, and we screened the film for the very first time since its only a screening in 1976. We screened it in Bologna in August at our festival in Cinema Ritrovato, and it was a very moving experience. The film is playing, or it played last week at New York Film Festival. It is playing uh, these days at London Film Festival. It's an absolute masterpiece, and a masterpiece which was not there. It didn't exist There was no copy left. It was just the original camera negative, and we have restored the film to its true glory, and it looks like one of the most fabulous films in the history of Iranian cinema. And try to see it. I'm sure it will come to local festivals in the US. Uh, Chess of the Wind. That has been my latest project, and it's something that I'm very proud of.
That sounds so exciting. I've been reading about this and I can't wait for an opportunity to see it. And it's amazing to hear that you've been part of that process. I think we're out of time, but we hope that we can continue our conversation and even possibly collaboration one day with bringing you back to the Virginia Film Festival, maybe even as a guest programmer or curator sometime. It's wonderful to have your film with us this year, and we hope that you stay well and healthy and that we'll be able to stay in touch.
Thank you very much, Samita. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks to the audience for watching the film and watching this conversation. Stay safe. Don't take any chances. See you next year.
Thank you.